Ethan Carter stood on his porch, the weight of the revolver in his hand feeling less like metal and more like destiny. 20 feet away, a man named Frank Ryder smiled. It was the kind of smile you see on a wolf right before it tears you apart. It never touched his eyes. His eyes were cold, dead things. Between them, a woman named Martha Wade stood with her back as straight as a rifle barrel. Two little girls, no older than 5, clung to her skirts, their faces buried in the fabric. They were the reason for all of this. They were the reason for the gun. "If you touch them again," Ethan said, his voice low and cold as a tombstone in January, "I'll bury you where no one will ever find the body." The words weren't a threat. They were a fact, simple as the sun rising or the river flowing. Frank's hand twitched, hovering near the pistol on his own belt. Martha's breath hitched, a tiny sound of terror in the vast mountain silence. "They ain't yours to protect," Frank snarled, taking a single arrogant step forward. The click of Ethan's hammer being pulled back was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a promise being sealed in steel. "Neither are they yours to sell," Ethan replied. Martha's eyes darted between the two men. A decision was forming in her mind, a choice that would change everything. She opened her mouth to speak, to finally choose a side. But to understand her choice, you have to go back 2 months. Back to the day she walked out of the wilderness like a ghost, dragging her life behind her in a broken-down wagon. The woman walked beside the broken wagon like it was a coffin. Its left wheel had splintered 10 miles back, but she hadn't stopped. She just untied the leather reins from the dead horse, wrapped them around her own waist, and kept pulling. She was the beast of burden now. Each rut in the road sent a jolt of pain through her tired body. Each breath was a sharp stitch in her side, right where grief had made its home. Her name was Martha Wade, and her shadow stretched long and thin behind her, as if the setting sun was trying to touch her one last time before the darkness swallowed her whole. Dust clung to her faded black dress, a second skin of sorrow and grit. The wind whispered names she tried desperately to forget, and the wagon creaked with the weight of memories. Inside, 2 small dresses lay folded, soft yellow muslin. One had a tiny tear at the hem. She kept it anyway. It was one of the only things she had left. When she reached the edge of a small, forgotten town, her legs finally gave out. She crumpled to her knees in the dirt, and the wagon bumped into her back like a lost child. She didn't cry. The kind of pain she carried was long past tears. It was a dry, hollow thing that had carved out her insides. A few townsfolk glanced her way, their eyes full of pity or suspicion, and then they looked away. No one offered water. No one asked her name. In this world, women who arrived alone, pulling wagons that held nothing but ghosts, were best left alone. The door of the general store creaked open. Martha thought for a fleeting moment that it might be an offer of kindness, but it wasn't. It was 2 little girls, twins, maybe 5 years old. They were all bones and angles, thin as fence wire. One wore a bonnet that was far too big. The other clutched a broken tin cup. Their faces were smudged with dirt and something darker, something that looked like old bruises. They stared at Martha. The taller one stepped forward. "You look like someone who remembers names," she said, her voice surprisingly clear. Martha blinked. Her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. The other girl knelt beside her and, with a small, gentle hand, brushed a strand of hair from Martha's face. Martha saw it then. The knuckles on the little girl's hand were a sickening shade of purple blue. Before she could react, a man's voice cut through the air, low and rough like wind rattling an old barn. "She's walked for miles. She ain't begging." Martha looked up. A tall figure stood in the shadows of the porch, a worn duster, a wide-brimmed hat hiding his face. His eyes weren't cruel. They were just quiet, filled with a stillness she recognized. "She's grieving," the man added. The twins looked at him, not with fear, but with a strange familiarity. "Can she come with us?" one of them asked. The man gave a single sharp nod. "Reckon so." No questions, no judgment. He stepped forward and gently unwrapped the leather reins from Martha's waist, handling them like he was removing bandages from a wound. He turned to lead the wagon away, and Martha found herself staggering to her feet, following him before her mind even knew what she was doing. The taller twin slipped a small, cold hand into hers. It was the first human touch she'd felt in nearly a week. They walked out of town as the sun bled across the horizon. The only sounds were their boots on the dirt and the rhythmic drag of the broken wagon. The cabin appeared as the sky turned to ash. It was a place built by hand, nestled among the cottonwoods. Smoke curled from the chimney, a silent welcome. He unlatched the gate and let her pass. Inside it smelled of pine and baking bread. A fire crackled in the hearth. In the corner, a wooden cradle sat empty, gathering dust like a forgotten promise. "You can take the loft," he said. "Girls sleep by the fire." He hung his coat and pulled off his boots with a sigh that spoke of a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He glanced at the girls, then at Martha. "You hungry?" She shook her head, though her stomach was a hollow, aching pit. The girls, however, nodded furiously. He ladled stew into bowls for them, and they ate with a quiet desperation that broke Martha's heart. She stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in someone else's life, in someone else's story. Then the man looked at her again, his gaze dropping to the two yellow dresses folded in her wagon. His eyes lifted to her face, and something passed between them, a silent, heavy understanding. "You had two?" he asked, his voice soft. She could only nod, the lump in her throat too big to speak around. "Me too," he said, and his words were a gut punch. "Didn't birth them, but I buried one just the same." It wasn't an invitation to share her pain. It was just a statement of fact, a shared piece of a hell they both knew too well. But she took the thread he offered. "They were 7, she whispered, her voice cracking. "Fever took the little one. The other, she just stopped wanting to breathe after." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Her eyes fell on the twins, now curled by the fire. "I don't know where they came from," he said, his voice even softer now. "Found them near the creek. Said they were sold. Their stepfather took the money and rode off. Left them like a pair of worn-out boots." Martha's spine went rigid. "Sold." He nodded grimly. "Didn't say for what. Don't need to." She moved toward the fire, drawn to the small, fragile bodies. One of the twins looked up, rubbed her eyes, and leaned into Martha's side without a word. The girl smelled of wood smoke and something sweet, and the simple, trusting weight of her small body nearly shattered Martha from the inside out. "They're not used to soft things," the man said from behind her. "Loud voices, quick movements. They sleep with one eye open." She stroked the girl's hair, her own hand trembling. He watched from a distance, giving her space, just being there. Martha sat down and pulled a blanket over the girls. Their small hands found hers in the dark and clutched them without fear. He dimmed the lantern. "I'll be on the porch. Can't sleep much indoors these days." The door creaked shut, leaving her in the quiet warmth of the firelight. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone with her grief. She lay there beside the sleeping children, the empty cradle watching her from the corner. She didn't sleep, not until one of the twins sighed and whispered, "You feel like someone who won't go." And in that moment, something inside her chest cracked open, just enough to let a little bit of air in. Just enough to breathe. When morning came, she found him on the porch. He sat in a wooden chair, a coat draped over his shoulders, his boots planted on the ground like he was part of the landscape. The land stretched out before them, all dust and wheat in endless sky. He didn't turn when she stepped out. "There's a bruise on the smaller one's arm," she said, her voice quiet, "and a welt behind the taller one's knee." "I saw," he replied. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but she could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface. She hesitated. "Do you think he'll come back? The man who sold them?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down and pulled something from a satchel by his chair. A revolver. It was old but clean, cared for. She looked from the gun to his face, shadowed by the brim of his hat. "I buried one already," he said, and his voice was like distant thunder. "If he hits them again, I'll bury him too." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. This wasn't about vengeance, she realized. It was about drawing a line. It was about standing between a child and the darkness of the world. "I don't know if I'm staying," she said, her fingers tracing the splintered wood of the porch rail. You don't have to, he answered, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Just don't leave before breakfast. I make coffee better than most pastors preach. And for the first time since her world had ended, Martha laughed. It wasn't a loud sound, just a small stirring of life inside her. From inside the cabin, one of the twins peeked through the window, her hair a tangled mess. She was holding one of the yellow dresses from Martha's wagon, pressing it to her chest like a precious treasure. The man cleared his throat. Name's Ethan, Ethan Carter. Martha, she replied, her voice a little stronger now. Martha Wade. The next morning, the smell of warm porridge and cinnamon drifted up to the loft. When Martha came down, she found the table set for 4. Tin cups, mismatched plates, and a jar of molasses. It was a simple, thoughtful gesture that spoke volumes. Ethan stood at the stove, his back to her. They don't like it too thick, he said without turning. Added some cinnamon. Hope that's all right. He handed her a cup of coffee. It was hot and strong and bitter, and it was exactly what she needed. One of the girls stumbled into the room and, without a word, wrapped her arms around Martha's waist. You didn't leave, she whispered into the folds of her dress. No, Martha said, her hand automatically going to stroke the girl's messy hair. Not yet. The other twin joined them, dragging a blanket behind her. They ate in a comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. Martha watched Ethan carefully pour milk into their cups. She saw the taller twin wordlessly hand half of her biscuit to her sister. It was a small, silent family, pieced together from broken parts. I'm Emma, the taller twin said suddenly. She pointed to her sister. She's Grace. She doesn't talk. Emma glanced at Ethan, who gave a small nod. Not since the day he found them, he finished for her. Martha looked at Grace, at her wide, knowing eyes. That's all right, Martha said softly. Sometimes words don't come easy. Later, they collected eggs from the coop. You've raised girls before, Ethan said, watching from the porch. She nodded, the familiar ache returning. Twins, identical. They used to roll down the hill in old flour sacks. His mouth curved in a sad, knowing smile. Sounds like something mine would have tried. Were they twins too? She asked. No, sisters. The little one liked frogs more than dolls. The other painted every rock she could find. He paused, his eyes darkening. Wife went first. Sickness. The girls. Sometimes grief makes its own weather, and children don't always survive storms they didn't cause. Martha's heart pounded in her throat. He was speaking a language she knew all too well. The language of loss, of guilt, of what-ifs that haunt you in the dead of night. I buried mine 3 days before I came here, she confessed. They don't even have a proper headstone, just a circle of rocks. That's still a marker, he said, his voice gentle. Still says someone was loved. She looked at the twins now crouching in the garden, giggling at a beetle. Do you think they'll remember their old life? They'll remember what was cruel, he said, but they'll hold tighter to what comes next, if it's kind. That night she woke to a soft whimper. She found Emma and Grace huddled under the table, trembling. He came back, Emma whispered, her eyes wide with terror. In my dream. He said he had a belt this time. Martha sank to the floor and wrapped them in her arms, shielding them with her own body. He's not here, she soothed. You're safe. You're not going back. The next day they fixed a broken fence line together. When they were done, he sat beside her in the grass. You said you didn't birth your girls, she said, needing to understand. How did they come to you? He looked toward the horizon. Neighbor's house burned down. No family left. My wife had already passed. I took the girls in, thinking it would be for a little while. He shrugged. Turned into 8 years. Did they call you Pa? Sometimes, when they forgot I wasn't. He stood and offered her his hand. She took it. As he pulled her to her feet, the twins came running, their hair flying, each holding a stone. Look, Emma shouted. It's shiny. And then Grace, the silent one, held out her stone. Mine has a heart crack, she said, her voice so soft it was almost lost on the wind. Martha froze. It was the first time she had heard Grace speak. Ethan's eyes widened, but he said nothing, letting the moment settle like gentle rain. Martha knelt and took both stones. They're beautiful, she said, her own voice thick with emotion. "They're for you," Emma announced. The girls threw their arms around her neck, burying their faces in her shoulder like they had finally found their rightful place. And over their heads, Martha saw Ethan watching. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were. That night when she went up to the loft, she found something laid across her cot. A faded floral dress, small, hand-stitched. It wasn't one of hers. It had belonged to one of his girls. She sank to the floor, clutching the small dress to her chest. It wasn't a gift meant to replace what she had lost. It was something else entirely. It was a place set at the table, a ribbon tied to a cup. It was a quiet declaration. This is a home that remembers. This is a home that heals. And for the first time in a very long time, Martha Wade believed it might be true. A few days later, while sweeping behind a stack of firewood, Martha's broom knocked over a small wooden box. The lid popped open, spilling its contents onto the floor. She knelt to pick them up and froze. It was a photograph, sepia-toned and cracked at the corners. A younger, clean-shaven Ethan stood ramrod straight in a Union Army uniform, the same blue coat her husband had worn. "Found that, did you?" Ethan's voice came from the doorway. It held no accusation, just a weary resignation. Her hand trembled as she held the picture. "You fought for the Union, 44th Illinois Infantry." His expression shifted, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "My husband," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was in the 44th. The air in the cabin grew thick, heavy with the weight of the past. "Wade," Ethan said, the name a ghost on his lips. Thomas Wade. The sound of her husband's name, spoken by this man, in this place, was like a physical blow. "You knew him." "We shared a tent one winter," Ethan said, taking the photograph from her hands. "Good man, quiet, carried your picture with him always." Martha's throat tightened. "He died at Chickamauga." Ethan's jaw clenched, a muscle working in his cheek. "I know," he said, his voice so soft she could barely hear it. "I was there." The world tilted on its axis. All these years she'd imagined Thomas dying alone on some bloody forgotten field. But he hadn't been alone. "I tried to save him," Ethan said, his eyes fixed on some distant, horrible memory. "A ball took him in the side. I carried him, half a mile toward the field hospital." He looked at her then, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "He talked about you, about the girls, said their laughter sounded like church bells." Her legs gave out, and she sank onto a nearby stool. It was a gift, this terrible, beautiful knowledge, a final message from the man she had loved, delivered by the man who was slowly, inexplicably, healing her broken heart. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling small and inadequate. He gave a single sharp nod, turning away before she could see the sheen of moisture in his eyes. But something had changed between them. It wasn't just shared grief anymore. It was shared history, a tangled thread connecting their pasts, tying them together in ways they were only just beginning to understand. That evening, the girls sat on the porch steps whispering secrets. Grace, the silent one, was speaking more and more. A word here, a phrase there. "She spoke again today," Ethan said, appearing at Martha's side with 2 cups of coffee. "Asked for more bread at lunch, clear as a bell." "She feels safe here," Martha said. "With you," he corrected gently. "She didn't start talking until you came." The compliment made her uncomfortable. She looked away toward the setting sun. There was still so much she didn't understand about this quiet, complicated man. "Your daughters," she began carefully. "You said it was an accident, the one who drowned." Ethan set his cup down, his hands gripping the edge of the table. For a long moment he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "That's the story I tell," he said. "It's the story the town believes." Martha waited, her heart pounding. "The truth is," he continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "I was a sheriff back then. After the war, I made enemies. One of them. He didn't like being put in a jail cell. He waited until I was out of town. He went to my house." Martha's blood ran cold. "Your wife, and Abigail," his voice went flat, devoid of all emotion. "Sarah, my wife, was already sick, bedridden. He didn't need to hurt her, but he did. And Abigail." My little girl, he hurt her too, just to prove a point, just to break me. The horror of it washed over her. The story he'd told her, the story he told everyone, was a lie, a shield to protect himself from a truth too terrible to speak aloud. That's why you left, she whispered. Why you came here. He nodded, his knuckles white against the tabletop. Hung up my badge that day. I couldn't protect my own family. How could I protect a town? Her hand found his, covering his clenched fist. It wasn't a gesture of pity. It was a gesture of understanding. A recognition that some wounds never heal. They just scar over. His fingers tightened around hers, rough and warm. I couldn't save my girls either, she confessed, the guilt she'd carried for months spilling out. I was a nurse. I saved so many strangers. But when the fever came for my own children, I had nothing. I failed them. No, Ethan said, his voice firm, his eyes boring into hers. You didn't fail them. You loved them. And sometimes love isn't enough to stop the storm. But it's everything. It's the only thing that matters. They sat in silence, their hands still joined, until the fire died down to embers. That night, something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer two strangers bound by grief. They were allies, survivors. And maybe, just maybe, they were the beginning of something new. The next morning, the girls found a box of old buttons in the barn. Mama, look! Emma shouted, then froze, her eyes wide. The word hung in the air, fragile and precious. Martha didn't correct her. She just smiled and gathered both girls into her arms. Later that day, Ethan announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. Was thinking you might come too, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. And the girls. The thought of facing the town, of the whispers and stares, made Martha's stomach clench. But she looked at the hopeful faces of the twins and knew she couldn't say no. The town looked different from the seat of a wagon, with a family at her side, but the stares were the same. As they entered the general store, a hush fell. The shopkeeper's wife, a woman with a face like a sour lemon, eyed them with open curiosity. Mr. Carter, she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. And company. This is Mrs. Wade, Ethan said, his voice flat. And her daughters, Emma and Grace. He was drawing a line, making a statement. She lives with us now, Emma piped up. She's our new mama. The silence in the store was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Martha felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks, but she met the shopkeeper's wife's gaze without flinching. Just then, the door swung open, and a woman in a severe black dress entered, followed by a man in a preacher's collar. The woman's eyes swept the room, landing on Martha like a hawk spotting a mouse. Well, well, she said, her voice a mixture of honey and thorns. I wondered when we'd see the new arrangement. Mrs. Hawkins, Ethan said, his tone clipped. Reverend. Mrs. Hawkins ignored him, her gaze fixed on the twins. And where is your real mother, girls? Grace shrank behind a display of ribbons. But before Emma could answer, Martha stepped forward. Their mother is no longer with us, she said, her voice calm and steady. But they are well cared for. Mrs. Hawkins arched an eyebrow. By you? A woman we know nothing about? Living, unchaperoned, with a man who is not your husband? She turned to the other women in the store, her voice rising. What kind of example does this set for our children? They're children, Ethan said, his voice a low growl. They need care, not judgment. They need a proper home, Mrs. Hawkins shot back. With a mother and a father, bound by law and the Lord's blessing. Not this. The air crackled with tension. Martha felt the weight of every eye in the room, felt their silent condemnation. But then she looked at the twins, at their frightened faces, and something inside her snapped. They have a home, she said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. One where they are safe and wanted. And that is more than some people in this town seem to understand. Mrs. Hawkins looked taken aback, but only for a moment. A sly, calculating look entered her eyes. Safe, you say? I wonder if the authorities would agree. Two unmarried adults, with children that belong to neither of you. It's a precarious situation, Mrs. Wade. Very precarious indeed. The threat was clear. She could make trouble. She could take the girls away. The ride back to the cabin was silent, the joy of the outing soured by the encounter. That night, as the twins slept, Martha found Ethan on the porch, staring out into the darkness. "You're thinking of leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking of what kind of life they'll have here," she replied, "with people like Mrs. Hawkins turning the town against us." He didn't deny it. He just sat there, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Then out of the darkness, a figure on a horseback emerged, moving slowly along the road that passed their property. The rider paused, his face hidden by the brim of his hat, and stared at the cabin for a long, deliberate moment. Then he touched his hat in a gesture that was half greeting, half warning, and rode on. "Who was that?" Martha whispered, a shiver running down her spine. Ethan's expression was grim, his face a mask of stone. "Trouble?" he said. He looked at the sleeping children, then back at Martha, and his eyes were filled with a cold, hard certainty. That was Frank Ryder, the girl's stepfather. The name hung in the air between them, a promise of violence. Frank Ryder, the man who had sold them, the man who had left bruises on their small bodies. "Are you sure?" Martha breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Grace pointed him out to me in town last month," Ethan said, his voice a low growl. "He didn't see her, but she knew him. I didn't think he'd have the nerve to come back." "What does he want?" "Nothing good," Ethan replied grimly. "A man like that doesn't come back to check on their welfare. He comes back because he thinks he left something behind." Martha glanced at the sleeping twins, their faces innocent in the moonlight. "Will he try to take them?" Ethan's hand rested on the revolver at his hip. "Not if he values his life." The steel in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it was a strange comfort. After years of feeling helpless, of being unable to protect the ones she loved, the thought of someone standing as a shield between these children and the world was like a balm to her soul. That night, she didn't sleep in the loft. She laid her blanket on the floor beside the girls, her arm draped protectively over Grace. Ethan sat in a chair by the window, the revolver on his knee, his eyes fixed on the darkness. They were a makeshift family, standing guard over their fragile new life. The next day, a heavy silence hung over the cabin. The twins seemed to sense the change, their play subdued, their voices quiet. Martha found herself watching the road, jumping at every gust of wind, every snap of a twig. She finally broke the tension. "I'm going into town," she announced. Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with concern. "It's not safe." "I'm not going to hide," she said, her voice firm. "I need to see the lawyer, Mr. Williams. I need to find out what our rights are, what their rights are." She expected him to argue. Instead, he just nodded. "Be careful," he said. He pressed a small pouch of coins into her hand. "For the stage, if you need it." The unspoken message was clear. If things go bad, run. But Martha wasn't running anymore. The lawyer's office was small and dusty. Lucas Williams was a man in his 50s with kind, tired eyes. "Legal guardianship," he said, steepling his fingers. "It's complicated. Without proof that he sold them, it's his word against theirs. A court will almost always side with a parent, even a stepfather." "But he hurt them," Martha insisted. "Can you prove it? Did a doctor see them?" Martha's hope began to fade. "No, Ethan found them." Williams sighed. "Then it's a difficult road, Mrs. Wade. There is one solution, one that would be more certain." "What is it?" "If you and Mr. Carter were to marry," the lawyer said gently, "you could petition for adoption as a stable, married couple. The court favors that. It would solve the legal problem and," he added with a knowing look, "the problem of propriety that I'm sure has been raised by some in this town." The suggestion stunned her. Marriage? To Ethan? It was a practical solution to a legal problem, a means to an end. But as she walked out of the lawyer's office, the idea took root in her mind, unsettling and surprisingly not unwelcome. On her way out of town, she found herself drawn to the small church on the hill. She slipped inside, seeking a moment of peace. "I didn't expect to see you here." She turned to see Reverend Hawkins standing in the aisle. His expression was softer now, away from the prying eyes of the town and his formidable wife. "My wife, she can be forceful in her convictions," he said, sitting in the pew beside her. "But her heart is in the right place. We are concerned for the welfare of those children." "They are well cared for," Martha said. "I believe you," the Reverend replied. "But appearances matter in a town like this. They can cause harm, especially to little ones." He paused. "Their stepfather, Frank Ryder. He came to see me." Martha's blood ran cold. "What did he want?" "He was asking questions. Strange questions. Not about the girls, but about the history of this valley. About the war. The war. Everything seemed to come back to the war. Ethan, her husband, and now Ryder. What was the connection?" "Reverend," she said, deciding to trust him, "we believe Mr. Ryder is dangerous. We fear he means to take the girls." The Reverend's face grew grave. "If those children are in danger, the church cannot stand idle." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a new resolve. "Perhaps Mrs. Hawkins and I should pay you a visit, officially, to welcome you to our congregation. A public show of support from the church might discourage any unwanted attention." It was an unexpected offer of alliance, a small glimmer of hope in the encroaching darkness. As she walked back toward the cabin, the sun sinking low, her mind reeled with everything she had learned. The road curved through a stand of cottonwoods, and suddenly he was there, blocking her path. Frank Ryder. He was taller than she remembered, leaner. His eyes were the color of muddy water, and his smile was a predator's grin. "Mrs. Wade," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "I was hoping I'd run into you. We need to talk about my girls." "They're not she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Is that what they told you?" He sighed, feigning disappointment. "Children have such vivid imaginations. They don't understand discipline." "They have scars," she shot back. "Those aren't imagined." His smile vanished. "I came back to make amends, to be their father. And you're Mr. Carter? He stole them from me." "You're a liar." He took a step closer, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Careful, Mrs. Wade. You're new here. You don't know the territory. You don't know what's buried in it." The threat was unmistakable. Before she could react, the sound of hoofbeats broke the tense silence. A rider appeared around the bend. A Native American man with long gray hair, his face a mask of stoic calm. "Mrs. Wade," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Ethan sent me. Supper's getting cold." Relief washed over her, so powerful it made her knees weak. She moved past Ryder, taking the man's offered hand as he pulled her up onto the horse behind him. "Another time, Mrs. Wade," Ryder called after them. "Give my love to the girls." As they rode away, she held tight to her rescuer. "Thank you, I'm Martha." "Running Fox," he replied. "I am a friend of Ethan's." "Did he really send you?" "No," Running Fox said, "but I watch. I listen. That man Ryder, he brings shadows with him. He is not just looking for the children. He is looking for something else." "What?" "Gold," Running Fox said, the word hanging in the air. "Union gold, lost during the war. He believes Ethan Carter knows where it is buried." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The girls weren't just a cover. They were the key. Ryder believed they knew something. Something their father, a Union soldier, might have told their mother. It wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about a fortune. And Frank Ryder was a man who would kill for it. When Martha returned to the cabin, the relief on Ethan's face was palpable. The girls rushed to her, clinging to her skirts. "You came back," Emma cried. "I promised I would," Martha said, kneeling to hug them, her eyes meeting Ethan's over their heads. Later, after the children were asleep, she told him everything. The lawyer's advice, the Reverend's offer, her encounter with Ryder, and Running Fox's revelation about the gold. Ethan listened, his face grim. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he went to a small chest in the corner and pulled out a yellowed, crumpled piece of paper. A wanted poster. The face staring back at her was younger, but it was unmistakably Frank Ryder. The crimes listed beneath were a litany of violence. Robbery, assault, suspicion of murder. It says he rode with Quantrill's raiders, Martha read, a chill running down her spine. They were a notoriously brutal band of Confederate guerrillas. Some of the worst of them came west after the war, Ethan said. Men who couldn't stop fighting. He looked at her, his eyes dark with a terrible certainty. He's not just a monster, Martha. He's a soldier who never surrendered, and he thinks this is his last battle. He paced the small cabin, the trapped energy of a predator in his movements. The lawyer, he was right, about the marriage. Martha's heart skipped a beat. He stopped in front of her, his expression serious. I'm not a whole man, Martha. I've got too many ghosts, but what's left of me is yours, if you want it. Tears pricked at her eyes. I've got ghosts too, she whispered. Maybe they can keep each other company. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch gentle and hesitant. We'll talk to the Reverend tomorrow, he said. We'll make it official. For the girls. For us. It wasn't a romantic proposal. It was a declaration of alliance. A promise between two broken people to stand together against the coming storm. And as he leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead, a quiet, reverent kiss. Martha knew she had made her choice. She wasn't just staying, she was home. That night, Grace crept up to the loft, her small face pale in the moonlight. I can't sleep, she whispered. Is the bad man coming back? Martha pulled back the blanket, and the little girl crawled in beside her. Ethan won't let him hurt you, Martha soothed. Neither will I promise. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then in a voice so small Martha almost missed it, she said, Our real mama promised too, before she went to heaven. Her little fingers twisted in the fabric of Martha's nightdress. Then he came, said he was our new pa, but he wasn't like Papa Ethan. He was mean. What was your mama's name, sweetheart? Martha asked gently. Elizabeth, Grace whispered, but Papa called her Libby. Elizabeth, Libby, the first concrete piece of their past. She had yellow hair, Grace continued drowsily, and she sang songs about angels, and she told us to protect the special box. Martha's senses went on high alert. A special box? Papa's box, Grace murmured, her voice already slurring with sleep. With his watch and his letters. She said it would take care of us. She hid it, said only we would know where. Before Martha could ask more, the little girl was asleep, her breathing soft and even. But Martha lay awake, her mind racing. A hidden box. Letters from their father, a Union soldier. A box Ryder would do anything to find. The next morning, Ethan rode out at dawn, saying he needed to check the fence line. But Martha knew he was scouting, watching for Ryder. A few hours later, Running Fox appeared at the cabin door, his face grim. Ethan sent me, he said without preamble. You and the little ones need to come with me, now. What is it? What's happened? Ryder is in town. He has men with him. He's telling people Ethan kidnapped the girls, that he's coming to get them back. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Martha. She quickly gathered the girls, and within minutes, they were on Running Fox's horse, riding deep into the woods to a hidden cabin high in the hills. You will be safe here, Running Fox said, leaving them with his wife, a kind, silent woman named Morning Dove. Ethan has gone to face Ryder. He said to tell you, he keeps his promises. The words echoed in her mind. If he hits them again, I'll bury him. The afternoon dragged on, each minute an eternity. Martha tried to stay calm for the girls, but her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Just as dusk began to fall, Ethan appeared at the door. He was bruised and mud-splattered, but he was alive, and he wasn't alone. With him was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing the star of a deputy U.S. Marshal. Martha, this is Deputy Marshal James Cooper, Ethan said. An old friend. Ma'am, Cooper said, tipping his hat, we've been tracking Frank Ryder for nearly a year. He's wanted for his part in a child-selling ring that stretches across 3 territories. He looked at the twins, his expression softening. Your husband here saved them from a terrible fate. Relief washed over Martha, so powerful it made her knees weak. So it's over? You arrested him? Cooper's face hardened. He got wind I was coming, lit out before we could grab him. But he won't get far. He's running, and he's desperate. 1 week? Ethan said, his voice cold as ice. You have 1 week to bring him in, Cooper. After that, I do what needs to be done. They stayed the night in the safety of Running Fox's cabin. As the girls slept by the fire, Ethan and Martha sat close, their hands intertwined. Grace told me about a box, Martha said quietly. Their father's letters. Their mother hid it. Ethan nodded slowly. That's what he's after, not just the girls. He thinks those letters will lead him to the Union Gold. He turned to her, his eyes serious in the firelight. I meant what I said, Martha. About marriage. About making a family. But I need you to be sure. This life, it's not going to be easy. She looked at this man who had carried her husband from a battlefield, who had rescued 2 lost children, who was willing to face down a monster for her, for them. I'm sure, she said, her voice steady. I want to build something new. With you. His hand tightened on hers. It was a promise. It was a vow. In the heart of the wilderness, surrounded by danger, a family was being forged in the fire. 2 days later, the Reverend Hawkins stood under the big cottonwood tree in their yard. The sun shone down, dappling the small gathering with light. To Martha's surprise, several townsfolk were there, including Mr. and Mrs. Peterson from the store, and even a stern-faced Mrs. Hawkins, who gave Martha a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Running Fox and Mourning Dove stood at the edge of the group, silent witnesses. Martha wore her best blue dress. Ethan wore a clean shirt. The girls, their hair braided with wildflowers, stood beside them, holding hands. The ceremony was short and simple. When Ethan slipped the ring on her finger, he leaned in and whispered, I will remember with you, and I will build with you. When it was her turn, she looked into his steady gray eyes and promised, I will stand with you, and I will heal with you. As the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up from the small crowd. The twins threw flower petals, their faces alight with pure joy. For a few precious hours there was no threat, no rider, no past. There was only the warm sun, the laughter of children, and the quiet, solid presence of her husband at her side. But as the guests departed and evening settled over the valley, Running Fox gave them a warning. The wind carries whispers, he said. Rider is close. Be watchful. The fragile peace was shattered. The storm was not over. It was just about to break. The morning after the wedding, Martha woke to find Grace sitting on her pallet, clutching a small pearl button. I had a dream, the little girl whispered, her face pale. About Mama Libby. She was in a garden. But then, the bad man came. He was looking for her. He was angry. He's coming back, Mama. I know he is. He's looking for Papa's special box. A chill ran down Martha's spine. The box with the letters? Grace nodded, her eyes wide with a terror that was more than a dream. Mama hid it before she got real sick. She said only we would know where to find it. Under the big oak tree by the creek, where the rocks make steps. Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. That's why he hurt Emma. He wanted her to tell him where it was. Before Martha could process this, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the valley. 3 riders approaching fast. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Deputy Cooper in the lead. But the look on his face was not one of good news. Riders close, Cooper said, standing in their cabin, his voice grim. Spotted yesterday at Silver Creek, less than a day's ride from here. And he's not alone. He has at least 3 men with him. Just as he spoke, a rock crashed through the cabin window, a piece of paper tied around it. Ethan snatched it up, his face turning to a mask of cold fury as he read. What is it? Martha cried, dread coiling in her gut. Ethan's eyes met hers, and in them, she saw her worst nightmare come to life. It's from Ryder, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He has the girls. The world spun out of focus. They had been just outside collecting eggs, not 10 minutes ago. Martha ran to the door, her heart a block of ice in her chest. The yard was empty. The small egg basket lay on its side, its contents spilled and broken in the dirt. He wants to make a trade, Ethan said, handing the note to Cooper. The girls, for the location of the gold. He says to come alone to Broken Ridge. By noon. Just me and Martha. It's a trap, Cooper said instantly. He'll kill all of you. We don't have a choice, Ethan replied, his hand already on his gun belt. They're my daughter, Martha said, a fierce, protective rage surging through her. I'm not standing by. I'm going. Cooper held up a hand. We'll go. All of us. But we'll do it my way. Ryder expects you to come in, emotional and unprepared. We'll give him what he expects to see. But we won't be alone. Broken Ridge rose from the prairie like the skeleton of a dead giant. Martha and Ethan rode toward it, appearing alone, vulnerable. But hidden in the rocks above, Cooper, his men, and Running Fox were waiting, rifles ready. Carter! Ryder's voice boomed from a grove of pines. That's far enough. He stepped out, a cruel smile on his face. Behind him, two of his men held the twins, their faces pale with terror. Emma had a fresh bruise on her cheek. Let them go, Ryder, Ethan said, his voice flat and deadly. First, you tell me where the box is, Ryder sneered, the one with Miller's map. It was then that Grace, small and fragile, spoke up. I know where it is, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I'll show you. Ryder's eyes narrowed. And why would you do that, little one? So you'll leave us alone, Grace replied. So you'll go away and never come back. Ryder laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He grabbed Grace, pulling her onto his horse in front of him. The other one stays here with my men, as insurance. He leveled his gaze at Ethan and Martha. And you're coming with us, all of you. Any tricks, and the girl dies first. They had no choice but to follow, riding deeper into the rugged hills. Martha's mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan. They were moving away from Cooper's position, away from help. After hours of riding, they reached a narrow valley with a rushing creek. An ancient oak tree stood in a small clearing. This is it, Grace said, under the big root that looks like a knee. Ryder forced Ethan to dig. After a few minutes, his shovel struck metal. He unearthed a small, tarnished box. Inside lay a stack of yellowed letters and an old silver pocket watch. Ryder snatched the box, frantically shuffling through the papers until he found what he was looking for. A hand-drawn map. A triumphant, greedy smile spread across his face. You've got what you wanted, Ethan said. Now let them go. Ryder laughed again. I don't think so. I can't have you running to the law now, can I? He gestured to his men. Tie them up. Leave them. You promised, Grace cried. I lied, Ryder said coldly. In that moment, something snapped. Grace bit down hard on the hand of the man holding her. He yelped, his grip loosening just enough for her to squirm free. Run, Grace! Emma screamed. The clearing exploded into chaos. Ethan lunged at one of the men. A shot rang out from the trees and Ryder staggered, clutching a bleeding shoulder. Federal marshals! Cooper's voice roared. Drop your weapons! A firefight erupted. Martha dropped to the ground, pulling Emma down with her. Ethan was moving through the gunfire, making his way toward Grace, who was hiding behind the oak tree. Ryder, recovering from the initial shock, retrieved his fallen revolver. He saw Ethan, his back exposed, and took aim. Martha saw it happen in slow motion. Without thinking, she grabbed the shovel Ethan had dropped. With a strength born of pure adrenaline, she swung it like an axe. The metal blade connected with Ryder's head with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground unconscious. The fight was over as quickly as it had begun. Cooper and his men rounded up the remaining outlaws. Ethan rushed to Martha, Grace safe in his arms. He pulled them all into a fierce embrace, a circle of 4, battered but unbroken. You hit him with a shovel, Ethan said, a note of awe in his voice. Nobody threatens my family, she replied, the words feeling truer than anything she had ever said. As Cooper secured the prisoners, Martha noticed the silver pocket watch lying in the grass. She picked it up. Inside was a tiny portrait, a beautiful young woman with yellow hair, holding 2 infant girls. Elizabeth, Libby, their mother. She would give it to the girls later, a way for them to remember where they came from. But as she watched Ethan lift Grace onto his horse and felt Emma's small hand slip into hers, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that their past was not their future. Their future was here, with her, with him. They were a family, forged in grief and fire. And as they rode away from the valley of shadows, leaving the darkness behind, Martha touched the small wooden swallow Ethan had carved for her. It felt warm against her skin, a promise of a life rebuilt, a promise of a home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. And let me know in the comments below, what would you have done to protect your family?